Welcome to the Key of Imagination. This week we're taking a look at the Twilight Zone episode, Long Distance Call. We're going to come to a conclusion as to whether or not we can label Grandma evil. We'll try and figure out the real motivation behind giving Billy back to his parents, and I'll reveal my moment of awe. I'll look at why sometimes it's okay for others to be mad at us. So, grab your keys and let's open up this door to the fifth dimension.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination.
Billy loves his grandmother, and there's certainly nothing wrong with a child loving their grandparents. But when it comes to how much Grandma loves Billy back, well, that's when things get a bit more complex. You see, Grandma loves Billy as if he were her own child, overstepping boundaries at times in the process. And all the while, Chris and Sylvia, Billy's actual parents, hold their tongues, choosing instead to try and maximize the happiness of their baby boy. And that happiness is put on full display at Billy's birthday party, where he receives a very special gift from his grandmother, a toy phone. But the joy of the occasion proves a bit too much for Grandma, and she has to be escorted back to her room, where things take a turn for the worse. With her last breath, she asserts that Chris is no longer her son, having been stolen away by a woman, and so Billy is now her only child. As Grandma takes her final breath, young Billy is left inconsolable. As time passes, odd things begin to occur. Billy is acting dangerously, playing in the road, and he keeps talking on his toy phone, always on the toy phone, like he's having a real conversation. When Sylvia snatches the phone from him one day, she hears a terrifying sound, the voice of Grandma. In a moment of horror, Chris and Sylvia find their baby boy unconscious in a pool, unable to speak, and with little breath left in his body. Chris, in a last attempt to save his child, picks up the toy phone and pleads with his mother to let Billy go, let him live. His prayers are answered, his pleas are heard, and Billy takes a deep breath. It looks like he will live again to see another birthday party. Long Distance Call is directed by James Sheldon. The teleplay is by Charles Beaumont and William Idelson. As for our cast, hey, we've got some Twilight Zone royalty here. That's Bill Mumy as our little boy Billy. Of course, we'll be seeing him again in a not-too-distant episode, and you should probably think good thoughts about him until then. Lily Darvis plays Grandma, and I'll just stop for a moment and say that she does a fantastic job of being creepy while still maintaining this authenticity of like a real grandmother. It's pretty amazing. Philip Abbott plays Chris, and Patricia Smith is our good sport of a wife, Sylvia. The episode first aired on March 31st, 1961. As for our tidbits, I'm going to turn to Mark Scott Zickery's Twilight Zone companion for this one. You know, there were a bunch of reshoots and rewrites with this episode, but one of the more interesting ones is the monologue that Chris gives into the phone at the end. In the original script, he says the following: Ma, if you can hear me, give him back to us. You said you loved me, and I know you did. I remember so many things. Remember that funny little dog I had? You let me keep him, even when he tore up all the furniture. Pa wanted to give him away, but you said no. And remember the first day of school, how scared I was. And you sat in the back of the room all morning, so I wouldn't cry? And that first pair of long pants. And the time I broke the window with the ball, you hid me under the bed when the policeman came. My graduation, and that first date I had, you remember? With that skinny redhead. How mad you were. We had lots of fights, but I always knew you loved me. And I loved you too, so very, very much. I never really got a chance to tell you. Oh, Ma, please give him back to us, so we can love him too. Give him back to us. I find the choice to rewrite the speech interesting, and I'll actually come back to why that is a little later in my second question. Question 1. Is the grandmother evil or a product of circumstances? We're going to have to do a little bit of clarification of this term here. What exactly do we mean by evil? For some, the term evil has a specifically supernatural connection. Think Satan. However, that doesn't always have to be the case. In fact, we're going to come at this question from a bit of a different angle. And to do that, we're going to be bringing in our old friend and distinguished archetypal psychiatrist, Carl Gustav Jung, in another edition of The Jung and the Restless. Jung has an interesting take on the topic of evil. He essentially makes the argument that it does not have to be tied to the supernatural for it to still have a similar feeling attached to it. You know what, let's bring in his language. That should help clarify what I mean here. Jung writes, "The reality of good and evil consists in things and situations that happen to you, that are too big for you, where you are always as if facing death. Anything that comes upon me with this intensity, I experience as numinous, no matter whether I call it divine or devilish or just fate. Something stronger than oneself, invincible, is at work, and one is up against it." The first thing I want to address is this term numinous. What does it mean? In short, the numinous is an awe-inspiring event, a moment of confrontation, one that can have the effect of resituating your position within the world or even within existence itself. It's overwhelming, powerful, and can leave you feeling quite small. Think of the scene when Chris's wife hears Grandma's voice on the toy phone. It completely shakes her relationship with reality. Now, a numinous experience doesn't have to be negative. In fact, this channel is still very much about awe-inspiring events that leave us feeling more tightly bound to each other. But in the case of Jung's discussion of evil, it tends toward the negative, making us feel that helplessness that I talked about earlier, because it's usually tied to an overwhelming entity. And although I may have a big ego at times, I don't think I'm an awe-inspiring entity. No? Nah. Okay, so how does all this connect with our episode? Let's talk about the very first exchange for a moment. Chris is telling his mother to take it easy. In fact, he says the rule of the house for today is that she has to go back upstairs once the birthday celebration is over. And this is her response. "That's fine, Chris. You know I always follow the rules of the house, except when I don't agree with them." Now, when you watch this episode the first time through, that little exchange can potentially come across as, well, a bit playful, and even like just a lighthearted joke. When you watch the episode subsequent times, the pretenses of a joke become pretty much gone, and you realize that Grandma is quite serious here. In fact, this initial exchange might be the most integral one to our discussion. Think about the psychological game that she's playing here with Chris. "I always follow the rules." That's a statement of absolute submission to Chris's wishes. But she then gives herself a wide opening to escape that statement by saying, "when I agree with them." So who's actually making the rules of the house? Is it Chris? Is it his wife? Or is it Grandma? We're going to bring in a theological phrase to help us out here even more: permissive will. Now, this is an incredibly complex kind of phrase when it comes to theology. There's permissive will, there's perfect will, and divine decree, and we can't really get into that here. Maybe someday if it connects with an episode, but not today. Let's just use a very surface-level version of this term, which simply means even though God can decree something to happen, He can also permit something to happen as well. In the case of Grandma, she clearly has a kind of divine disposition to her, where she both decrees and permits. And although some people who are perfectly normal can also have this kind of mindset, given where we know the episode is going, I think it warrants a bit of a squinty eyes, raised eyebrow, skeptical look from us. Now, we've essentially introduced the concept that evil, in the Jungian sense, is a numinous force that makes us feel small and vulnerable against a seemingly invincible object that is greater than us. We've also looked at some of Grandma's language and realized that she has a bit of a divine mind going on here in terms of her position to the family. Let's start to pull all this together and come to a decision regarding our question. And for this one, I'm actually going to just come out and say it. She's evil. There. I said it. And it's recorded. And I can't take it back. I think she's evil. But, like I tell my students, you can't just drop a claim there on the table and walk away. You have to be able to justify it. So let's do a little bit of that as well. Let me begin by saying that I understand that Chris lays out a rationale for why his wife should not take what Grandma does so personally. It's because she's had 2 children prior to Chris and lost them both, which I'm not even going to pretend like I understand here. I'll just simply say it sounds like the worst possible thing you can experience as a human. But, and here is the difference, what we have going on here in this episode is actually quite literary in nature. You have a kind of dark parallel here of biblical sacrifice. If in the Christian theology God sacrifices his son for the sake of humanity, and of course you have to acknowledge Mary's role in this as well, giving her son for the betterment of the entire world, what Grandma does here is sacrifice her own son for the benefit of herself. Oh, did you think I misspoke there when I said her son? Let me remind you of what she says about her grandson. She says on her deathbed to Chris in front of everyone, "No, my son was taken from me by a woman. This is my son now, Billy." And so she has not only cast away Chris, her real son, but she's decreed, there's that will thing again, she has decreed that Billy is now her son. And in this dark Marian turn, she's willing to sacrifice him, not for the world, but for her own desires. Now, for those of you who have been listening to me now for a couple of years, you know that I tend to be the kind of person who believes in forgiveness, believes in mercy, believes in the ability for someone to find their way back into humanity. But sometimes you come across a person like this, like Grandma, and if you allow them to continually assert their decrees and permissive wills, they begin to believe that anything that satiates their desires is right. You know, we can deal with a lot of selfishness to a certain point as adults, but what she does here, in my humble opinion, is quite evil. Question 2. Why exactly does Grandma give Billy back? So the plot of the episode gives us a pretty reasonable answer to this question. Chris pleads with his mother on the phone about all of the things that Billy is going to miss if he stays with Grandma. School, girlfriends, and wearing long pants. Now, I don't know why they're denying the poor boy long pants, but we get the gist of it. You could absolutely accept the answer that Grandma is persuaded by Chris's pleas and simply lets the boy go. But I do think that there is at least one layer of this interpretation that we can explore a little more. Does she make the decision for Billy's sake or for Chris's? In essence, we have a kind of rhetorical battle going on here, and my use of rhetoric is in the classical sense, as in persuasive speech. In order for Billy to be released from Grandma's grip, Chris's rationale needs to be greater than Grandma's needs or wants to continually control Billy. But what part of this equation involving Chris actually works? Let's lay out some potentials, and then we can explore them a little bit in more detail. Even though Chris is the one who is speaking, he's essentially representing 2 people, himself and Billy. Yes, in a more normal situation, we would hopefully say that Chris is speaking in unison with his wife as well. But, this isn't exactly Tuesdays with the Waltons. This is something else. Chris is definitely representing himself here, and it's because he knows that bringing in his wife, Sylvia's name, will probably only make things worse. So, yeah, he's really just representing himself and Billy. Let's talk about Billy for a second. Would her love for Billy be enough? There's no doubt that she loves him. As I previously mentioned, she calls Billy her own son at this point, and she clearly thinks that she's what's best for him. You know, if she weren't so evil, we might find that a bit charming, if still a bit unsettling as well. But does this interpretation hold water? Not really. It certainly doesn't take a master rhetorician to argue that her love for Billy is really just a desire to own, to control him, to feed off of his innocent love for her. So does she let Billy go for his own sake? I don't think so. And that takes us to Chris. Does Grandma love Chris? Again, I think you can say yes. Okay. Before people start throwing things at the screen and screaming, how can she love Chris after all that she's done to him, said to him, put him and Sylvia through? Listen, I'm not saying that she loves Chris in the way that we're supposed to love each other. I mean that she believes she loves him based on the same controlling parameters that she also loves Billy. Now, as I mentioned briefly in the first question, we know from Chris that his mother had lost 2 children prior to him. So she knows what it's like to lose not just 1 child, but 2. We can make the argument that she might want Billy to live because she doesn't want Chris to have to go through what she went through. That would at least somewhat redeem her evil ways from question 1. But do we get any sense that Grandma would actually think this way or come to this realization? Perhaps if the story had given us something, a small nugget of redemptiveness toward this idea, we could believe this version. But we really don't get that, at least not in my eyes. You might see something differently, which is what makes talking about these episodes and hearing you all in the comments so fun. However, in this case, I don't think she does this for Chris. At least not really. But hold on to your hats. I've got a bit of a wild take here. I said she didn't really do it for Chris's sake, but I do still think she does it for him. Let's think about that scene when Chris is on the phone with Grandma, pleading with her to let Billy go, begging, crying, completely at the mercy of whatever decision his mother decides to make. Can you see where I'm about to go with this? In doing what she does to Billy, she's able to reduce Chris once again to her little boy, to a child who has to depend on his mother in order to get what he wants. Now, you might recall in my tidbits section, I read the original speech that Chris makes to his mother, and that original one somewhat makes this point even more strongly. The changes to the speech, or the rewrites, make him a little less boyish, I suppose, but I still think that rewritten script has the same effect. For Grandma, this phone call might be the greatest gift that she could ever receive, a delectable morsel of control even greater than what she establishes with Billy. Because, think about this part. Think of how Chris is behaving here. He sneaks into the room by himself, makes the phone call to her in secrecy from Sylvia, rendering her out of the picture for much of this episode, out of any part of these conversations and decision-making processes. So why does Grandma let Billy go? I think it's because she finally got what she really wanted. She got her baby boy back. Question 3. What are your moments of awe? My moment of awe is, perhaps a little bit darker than usual. My heart goes out to Chris, to a point. I want to emphasize that. He obviously loves his mother, or at least he cares deeply for how she thinks about him, so much so that it seems to pull him away from his wife and her own misgivings about how Grandma is growing bold in her affections for Billy. Now, what makes this a moment of awe for me is that it's not always easy for some people to allow others to be mad at them. At base, I do believe that most people want to be liked. However, there are just some times when you have to love someone enough that, for their own safety, you have to be okay if they're mad at you. You have to put the onus on them to love you back enough to not put you in a dangerous situation either. At some point, Chris needed to tell his mother, "That's enough of that. I don't want you talking to my child like that, and I don't want you speaking to my wife like that either." Now again, I don't want to make light of how difficult this can be for some people, but if that person you're talking with about boundaries loves you as much as they say they do, they should be angry for maybe a day or two, but then they should accept that you're trying to do what you believe is right. This Twilight Zone episode is a fictional story, but I shudder at the thought of what would have happened to Billy had Chris not been able to convince his mother to give him back. And to think, all of that might have been avoided with a simple phone call to his mother. As for my rating, I don't know if I've changed significantly since the last time I saw this episode or if I'm just in an oddly sensitive mood, but this one hit me hard in the darkness department. It felt like I was watching a horror movie more than a Twilight Zone episode. But then again, there are a handful of these kinds of episodes that feel that way. I think Nightmare as a Child has a bit of this horror feeling as well. Okay, so my rating. I'm going to go upper-lower tier. I'll be interested in seeing how people vote in the YouTube posts. Now, I originally had middle-upper tier, but I changed it because I thought about a comment regarding my rating system, which I'm about to talk about in my comment section in a moment. Next time, we'll be taking a look at 100 Yards Over the Rim, and here are your questions to consider when watching the episode. Question 1. What role does pilgrimage play in this story? Question 2. Is the future knowledge of success really enough to see us through difficult times? And question 3. What are your moments of awe? So I've got a couple of comments to highlight from the YouTube channel. On my static episode, Ilana Elise states, I still have TiVo, like the old school box. It's kind of amazing. Firstly, yes, I love this. I sold a few TiVos briefly at Circuit City when I worked there way back in the day. And they were actually quite ahead of their time, those TiVo people. I say hold on to it until it dies. Now, secondly, if you have a minute, make sure you let me know the proper way to pronounce your name with a phonetic comment or something if you can. You're always so kind with your thoughts, and I want to make sure that I take the time to get your name right. Now, secondly, Ilana also asked for a refresher on my rating system. And I've mentioned something loosely around whether or not I would get up during a Twilight Zone marathon as being a big part of my system. But you know what? You've inspired me to actually put it down to paper. Now, I don't have it done yet, as I'm getting slammed at work at the moment with a lot of events and services. But I think that would be a lot of fun. So I appreciate the opportunity to get those thoughts down on paper. Friend of the show, Phoenix Dog, added the following comment on that same static episode. The Twilight Zone radio dramas, narrated by Stacy Keach, these are full-cast, modern dramatizations of original scripts, often expanded with more dialogue and updated tech. The Twilight Zone radio dramas often add depth by exploring internal thoughts or expanding scenes that were bare bones in the original 25-minute TV episodes. Yeah, this is exact. You know what? Let me just say that this is a better point than I was trying to make in my actual episode. If you have a particular episode that you find to be, maybe a bit on the mediocre side, sometimes those radio drama versions can actually make them a lot more interesting and give you a new angle from which to view them. They're absolutely worth the time if you have it. Want to support the channel? Consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing the show with a friend. All of the usual algorithmic gymnastics that, aren't we? Yeah, we're about to finish up the Winter Olympics. Oh, they don't have gymnastics in the Winter Olympics, I don't think. But you know what? I'm still, this American judge is going to give all of you out there a perfect score, a 10. You're all fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your support with the thumbs up and the liking and the subscribing and all of that stuff. And my audio-only listeners, the same thing. Thank you so much for all of you do. Perfect scores for all of you out there. So those gymnastics, they do help us expand our awesome community of Twilight Zone fans. Plus, you never know. I might just highlight your comment in an episode of the show, as long as it's family-friendly. And if you want to be immortalized in our list of key KOI supporters, consider joining one of our membership tiers on YouTube or Patreon. 50% of all money taken through this channel, after the platform fees, is going to charity. 25% to the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, and 25% to the Gary Sinise Foundation. Plus, I'm getting pretty good at having like a bunch of the membership-only videos there, so go check out that gallery and see if anything interests you. For more information about me, my scholarship, head over to thekeyofImagination.com. That being said, even if you hated every minute of this, I'm still going to thank you for spending some time with me. Until next time, remember, all doors are open to those who possess the key of imagination. Oh, and if you have a toy phone and it starts ringing, maybe just don't answer it. I can't think of any like shows or movies where that was a good thing, where the toy phones were ringing and it's like, yay! Someone's talking to a child on a toy phone. So, yeah, if you see one, just get rid of it. I think that's good advice.